Hello everyone, this is Mr. Morrow. Unfortunately, I am not able to attend class today. However, we will still continue and forge on in the traditional sense that our classroom will be exactly the same, except I will not be there to laugh with you and enjoy teaching you in person. You will have to have all of the enjoyment to yourself and tell me about how much fun you had next week. I am at Keystones this week, so I will not be there. However, I will bring back stories to share with you, as I hope you guys have stories to share with me. And hopefully, you all enjoy this lesson on the economic systems of the world. Um, and we're going to take a look today at specifically capitalism and communism. One thing I would like to point out to you that you will see on the screen is that by Friday, December 11th, you should have all of the assignments from Unit 1 up through the Unit 3 exam completed. The amount of work I'm requiring you guys to do for this week is not an extreme amount. It's only one additional assignment from last week, as I know many of you may be at the Keystones taking the exams yourself, so I don't want to overburden you. I think that's only fair. So, let's go ahead and take a look at some of these pictures I put up. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm dating myself a little bit here. In the bottom left hand corner, we have Jerry Maguire, and he says, "Show me the money." It's a great scene. If you type it into YouTube, you'll get a good kick out of it. Great movie. It's really funny. It's about a sports agent working who gets fired from his job and is working as an independent agent. And contracts an Arizona Cardinals football player who basically makes him scream into the phone, "Show me the money," as loud as he can until, and then he finally decides to hire him and leave the agency he is with previously. Great movie. I would definitely recommend watching it. And then the next one is Mr. Wonderful from the Shark Tank. If any of you guys watch that show, and he's always very serious and always tries to get the best deal for himself possible and shows no mercy. So it's all about the money all the time. Never forget that. It's definitely a quote he would use. And then finally, I put just a funny picture of George Washington on the dollar bill for you guys to enjoy. So, today's goals and objectives. I want you to be able to identify the main elements of the following economic systems. So, hopefully, you'll be able to tell me about them next week verbally and write them down as well. We have some movies. So, the economic systems and the key terms I want you to be able to explain are capitalism, laissez-faire, free market, communism, socialism, and the mixed economic system. So let's take a moment. Let's look at what we're going to be doing here. Um, Capitalism is an economic system where investment and ownership of goods and services resides with the individual or corporation. So the ultimate goal is making money for the individual. When we look at America and its initial beginnings, it was a mostly capitalist society where businesses ran the idea. The government had a little interference with them. They came up with an idea and they sold, they produced and sold their products without any laws to deter them from doing it. So when we looked at the steel industry, the oil industry, and the railroad industry, they could basically price the goods at whatever they wanted and hire workers for whatever they wanted because there were no minimum wage requirements. There were no rules to say you have to have competition that's fair to everybody. And we saw a lot of vertical and horizontal integration going on throughout those businesses. So those businesses relied heavily on the capitalistic approach. Supply and demand regulate the economy. If nobody wanted to buy the goods, the product would in turn fail, and the company would close. There would be no need for it because people don't want it. However, if there's a huge supply, if there's a huge demand, the price of the goods is going to be higher, and they're going to produce more of them. Market is always changing and evolving with the needs and wants of a population, and we see gaps between social classes occur when we have capitalist societies. So you see higher up products being priced higher, and there being a higher demand for. So think of Apple. A good way to look at this. If you think back a few years ago, Apple was so much more expensive than Android phones that there were two tiers of people. There were the people, and I was not one of them. I was poor. I was in college, who only could afford the Apple phones because they were the higher quality, more expensive, and they still are with their Mac computers. And there was that class of people who could afford the Apple products. Then there were those of themselves, normal, everyday citizens who didn't have tons of free money to spend, who would own an Android or a off-brand or just a traditional brand computer or laptop and cell phone. So you kind of see social class difference. When we look at clothes, that's another social class system that shows itself. Cars as well. You have people that drive, your normal Toyota, Nissan, Ford, Chevy, all of those, and then you have people who drive Mercedes-Benz and Hummer and Cadillac Escalades, all of those things. They show themselves, and then you have people who get a driver for themselves. The capitalist society can kind of show you who has more money and who does not. And when we take a look at some of the good industries on the right here, we'll take a look at McDonald's, Nike, Ford, Adidas, Reebok, all these different things kind of show you businesses that were born out of this capitalist idea. People needed their goods, whether it was food, clothing, cars, even Uncle Sam is here pointing saying, I want you to buy this crap. These people have businesses that relate heavily to the capitalist society. So, types of capitalist markets. Now, there are two different types of market when we look at the capitalist society. So, if you think of it as a big tree, at the top of the tree is going to be this idea, or like a thought bubble. It's going to be this idea of capitalist. And then down from there, there's branches. And on the branches, we have two different capitalist markets. We have the laissez-faire economy and the free market economy. Laissez-faire means to let it be or leave it alone. It's French. Basically, there's no government interference. The market will figure itself out. If an economic good is worthwhile and people want it, prices will go up, people will produce more of them. If it begins to falter and people no longer want them, well, then the price is going to go down, and eventually if people refuse to buy it or don't want it, or it's priced too high, the company will go out of business. So that's the laissez-faire approach. Transactions between different companies where people are not subject to tariffs, government subsidies, and enforced monopolies. So basically what that's saying is there won't be a tax on it, there won't be a subsidy, and basically a subsidy is when the government gives aid or money to somebody to produce a good for a cheaper cost that they'll sell it for. So for example, farmers get a subsidy on corn and other products, so they're encouraged to grow a lot of it, and they're able to sell it for a cheaper price than if the government didn't give them any extra aid or subsidy. It lets things take their own natural course, and the market balances itself out. Now, the free market economy, it's when the government does not set control or control prices. It's the supply and demand. The market economy is based solely on the supply and demand. There are still tariffs, there still are subsidies, but the idea of supply and demand really rule this market force. The U.S. is a partially free market economy because when we look at it, the U.S. has certain areas where the market supply and demand runs a course. So when we take a look at that, we take a look at things that aren't subsidized. We're looking at the fast food industry. We're looking at clothing. We're looking at anything that's really not a good produced by a farmer or any other product that is subsidized. So what I want you to do is take a moment, pause this recording, and take a moment. Look up and Google and search what industries are regulated in the U.S. Let me know if any surprise you, and then look at what industries are not regulated in the U.S. What type of industries just produce their own goods, and the government has no control over. They kind of run rampant and decide what to produce, how to produce it, what prices to sell it for. So pause it, take a moment, look it up. Let me know what you think next week for sure. Write it down now so that way when I ask you, you'll have something to pull out of scratch paper, and we'll be able to discuss it. So when we take a look at the capitalism line graph, this graph shows the rate of profit in the American business sector from 1929 to 2003. In a capitalist society, profit fluctuates according to many things. So some of these things that are influencing it are politics, availability of resources, the price of raw materials, um, different subsidies, and different tax and tariffs, and outside sources from outside resources being shipped into the U.S. So notice the ebb and flow of profits. There's no straight line to indicate that says profit stays the same during any given period of time. When you look at it, it's a spike and a decline and a spike and a decline. So basically, if you're going to start a business, choose wisely and make sure that you're going to have all of the key factors on your side, such as the resources that are easily available. You have a factory able to produce it, and you're falling in line with all of the law and different structures that they present to you. So again, let's take a look at another graph here. What does this graph tell us about the U.S. GDP? GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product, or the monetary value of all the goods and services produced in the United States. So when we take a look at this graph, there's several different countries and nation groupings put together. So we have the Eurozone, so all of those that use the euro, the rest of the world, China, India, and Japan. So let's take a look here. When we look at this graph critically, would we say the United States produces a lot of goods that people invest in and buy, or would we say that they do not? The U.S. is highlighted with the arrow pointed to it, and if you could put a percentage on the portion of pie that the United States has out of the product produced, what percent would you give it? 1/4, 1/3, 1/8? Would you consider that a good chunk of the pie or a bad chunk of the pie? Does it surprise you that it is as big or as small as it is, especially when you compare it to the likes of China in the Eurozone? Because if we think about it, almost everything we purchase does say made in China. But obviously, when we take a look at this chart, the GDP might surprise you a little bit. Maybe you could, what I would suggest you doing is taking a moment, pausing this, and looking up why is this the case? Why is everything that we buy say made in China, but yet our gross domestic product is so high? Take a moment, let it simmer in your brain, and come to class next week. Let's talk about it. It'll be a really cool discussion, I think, for sure. So, the bad side of capitalism. The wealthy can take over. If you have a lot of money, you can purchase all of the objects, the raw materials, the resources, and set a price on the labor that it costs to produce it, and you can essentially run rampant over it. We saw this with the oil industry, the steel industry, and the railroad industry previously. It creates a huge inequality with big gaps between the rich and the poor when they're able to do this. We talked about how the monopolies through horizontal and vertical integration were created, and it creates greed and competition instead of a betterment of all people. Basically, it's me before anybody else. I'm going to take care of myself and go from there. Remember, it's both a social and economic system. So you look at this guy kind of dangling bread in front of a guy because he knows he can get him to work for whatever. He's obviously a heavy-set guy who likes his food, and the guy that is kind of holding back because he's one of his workers or he's somebody who's struggling to make a living is hungry for anything, and just giving him any type of small income will reward him enough to work for him. It can be good, it can be bad, especially if capitalism is left unchecked without minimum wages, without health and safety inspections, and all of that good stuff. Finally, we're going to take a look at capitalism. I have a video for you. This is part 1 of the lesson. You guys can watch part 2 after you watch the video on capitalism and give me some feedback. It's going to take a look at the first part. There's actually 2 parts of the video as well. So you have a 2-part lesson, a 2-part video on capitalism, and then a 3rd video on economic systems called communism. So you will have lots of videos and feedback to share with me. I'm going to go ahead and end part 1 of the lesson. Go ahead and watch the capitalism videos, part 1 and 2, and then we will pick it up with our PowerPoint discussing communism.